Lincoln 103, 5 Lincoln 102, Lincoln 103 and 102.
Responding to 401 parking structure, section 1 boy.
Henry 8, Henry 9. Respond to gate 437 Bravo for your dignitary detail. 3K 911 unattended, 400 lower level near carousel 4, black bag. GTA in progress, 401 parking structure, section 4 boy.
Responding to 401 parking structure, section 1 boy.
415 passenger onboard aircraft.
Control 2 Franklin en route.
484 suspect, female, Hispanic, 28 years of age, blue jeans, no further.
Control 5 Frank 401 is en route.
On the legal side, this week we're going to be taking a look at what law enforcement officers can and cannot do when it comes to how they handle individuals detained or placed under citizen's arrest by security officers. Police officers do have discretion as to whether or not they transport or even accept the charge that the security officer wants to place against the individual. And we'll be looking at that this week on the legal side. I'm your host, Rick McCann, and it's good to be with you on this episode. Join us every other Sunday for On the Legal Side. Well, today we are discussing a topic that does come up quite often in many states. Numerous states across the country allow private security officers to detain suspects in criminal cases, both misdemeanor and felonies. Some states allow private security and citizens to place individuals under citizens' arrest, private person arrest. And that's what we're talking about today on the episode of On the Legal Side. If you're a public safety officer or a security officer, a non-commissioned law enforcement frontline protector, you may be very familiar with this topic. You've maybe even had some first-hand knowledge and experiences yourself of situations that occur that aren't right, don't look good, and goes against what you thought was going to happen. Many states allow citizens and certainly private security make citizen or private person arrest. But then what do you do when you have that person in custody? How do you get that person from point A to point B, from the site of the arrest to either the booking facility or the magistrate's office to seek an arrest warrant? This is not an uncommon situation. It actually occurs more than you might think. In some states, private security officers by statute can transport their arrestee firsthand, immediately themselves, from point A to point B, from the scene of the crime all the way to the magistrate's office, to get that probable cause affidavit and the arrest warrant. And it's important, very important, that we do this in a speedy process. We do not want to detain that individual or individuals for a long period of time, because you yourself being charged with either unlawful restraint or even, in some cases, kidnapping, which is a federal offense as well as a state offense. In places where you are allowed to make a detention or a citizen's arrest, even with that authority by statute to transport a prisoner to the magistrate's office or to the jail, it is always advisable that when allowed, you contact your local police or county sheriff's agency and let them handle the transportation. You cut down on your risk, you cut down on officer safety issues, and you ensure that that prisoner, once they're turned over from your custody to law enforcement's custody, that the liability aspect is over. Because once law enforcement physically takes control of the prisoner, they assume that liability. Anything that happens, whether it be escape attempt, the officer is involved in a use of force incident with that prisoner, or even if that prisoner becomes ill or should happen to die in custody, it will be in the custody of law enforcement and not the private officer. Very, very important aspect of the transportation end of it, because depending on the situation, especially if force was used, you want to make sure that person is treated by medical professionals and signed off that he's okay, and then transported to the jail or the magistrate. Security officers, to be honest, are not trained to transport prisoners. They're not trained to deal with prisoners. Most have never transported a prisoner, and many have never even had one in custody. Let's think about that. Let's think about that. Let's look hard at those facts. While you might say, yeah, it's no big deal. I'll put some cuffs on them, I'll strap them in the back seat of my car, and I'll roll on down to the magistrate's office. Just remember, as soon as you put cuffs on that person, as soon as you have them in your care, custody, and control, you are 100% liable, responsible, culpable for anything that happens. And if anything does happen, the first thing they're going to ask, both during a criminal investigation and a civil lawsuit, what is your experience in handling and transporting prisoners? Have you been certified? Have you gone through any type of training or course that would specifically prepare you for these duties? And for the most part, we have to answer no. We have attended a special course. We have not been certified. We are not jailers. We are not prisoner transport companies. We don't have that experience. So that opens up a whole big Pandora's box, and also it allows other incidents and situations to be considered in a civil case as well as a criminal case. When your state allows you to detain or arrest, it is, of course, always advisable to contact your local law enforcement to do the transporting. But what happens in those cases frequently, I don't want to say all the time or even a majority or most of the time, because that's not always true, but it happens frequently, is that the law enforcement officer will be dispatched to your location. They'll ask you what happened. They'll look and consider the circumstance and whether or not you had probable cause to detain that person, whether or not you have a legal right to arrest that person, to have citizens arrest authority. They'll look at whether or not you use force against that person to take them into custody. They'll take a lot of different things into consideration before they put that prisoner into their vehicle. Seasoned officers on the job for years, they understand the responsibility and the liability whenever they have a prisoner in custody. And since this is not their prisoner, a lot of them do not want to take that responsibility in hand. They don't want to have anything to do with it, although they must transport, in many states, a private citizen's arrestee or detainee to the magistrate at least to see if there's enough probable cause for an arrest warrant. They really don't have much of a choice in some cases. But there are times when police officers use their discretion, which they are allowed to do on misdemeanor cases, and not transport, and tell the security person, hey, I'm not taking him into custody. I don't think you have enough for probable cause. I don't think a magistrate will give you an arrest warrant or sign off on this charge, so I'm not going to take him into custody. I will get his ID, will identify him, we'll get good contact information for him. At that point, you are free to go to the magistrate's office and seek your own arrest warrant. Provide the magistrate with an affidavit of circumstance, what happened, and present your case and your evidence, your statement, and your signature on your affidavit, and maybe you get an arrest warrant, maybe not. It will be completely up to the magistrate or the judge in your jurisdiction. At that point, that arrest warrant will go into the database, NCIC, the National Criminal Information Computer Database, and it'll sit there until they get contact with that suspect. They're not necessarily going to go out and seek him, go try to find him, knock on his door, and serve the warrant. Depending on the charge, it will probably just be sitting in the computer system, although if it's a serious enough charge, then they will, and if it's a small jurisdiction, oftentimes they try to serve those arrest warrants even if they're minor in nature. Well, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? At least the suspect's going to be arrested. It may not be immediate. It may not be transported. That person may not get transported that day, that night. But whatever the criminal offense was, he'll be prosecuted for it. That works out sometimes better than if you transport the prisoner to the magistrate's office and the magistrate says, nope, not enough probable cause. We can't establish that a crime has been committed. Or on the other flip side, nope. Security officers in our state, they cannot arrest on a misdemeanor. A citizen cannot place somebody else under arrest for a misdemeanor. It's only a felony that has occurred in their view, in their presence. So we're not signing any warrant. We got to release this person right away. He is out of there. Now what do you have? Now you have a big lawsuit, a very big potential for you and your company and your client to be sued because you had no legal authority to take that person into custody to begin with. That's why we always say, and I always say, make sure 100% that you know the law of the land, the law of your state. They vary from state to state. The authority of a citizen, of a security officer, varies from state to state. You may be able to detain a person for a misdemeanor. In every state, security, work in retail, loss prevention, they can act as the agent of the retailer and take custody of shoplifters. In some states, security officers may detain somebody that is creating a public alarm or being disorderly or trespassing. They may not be able to effect an arrest, but they can detain them until police can get there and establish whether or not there's enough for a physical arrest. But be sure that you understand the law of the land and in your state, what you can and cannot do, what a misdemeanor is and what a felony is, because there's quite a difference. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, in part 2, what happens when the cop takes custody of the prisoner and then kicks him out of the car and lets him go, and the guy never makes it to the jail to the booking process or to the magistrate. What happens then? What do you do? Who's liable? Who's responsible? Can you be sued? Can you be arrested? Can you be held liable? We are coming back on the Private Officer News Beat right here, and when we do, we've got a lot of other great things to share with you. So don't go away here on the Private Officer Beat. We'll be right back.
Slow down.
And move over.
When you see lights, vest,
Or reflectors. Please, give us some room. Slow down.
And move over.
we look out for you.
So look out for us.
Please,
Please,
please.
slow down.
And move over.
It's the law.
It's the law. It's the law.
There was the explosion, and I remember just opening my eyes, and it got both of my legs. I had surgery after surgery, and what's going to happen next? The Wounded Warrior Project said, look, brother, everything's going to be okay. 3 months from now, 4 months from now, a year from now, you'll be fine. I don't know if I would be as well adjusted as I am now if it wasn't for them.
To learn more, call 1-877-832-6997 or visit woundedwarriorproject.org.
Welcome back, everyone. We're on the legal side. We're talking about in this episode prisoner transport and situations that occur in real life out in the field when law enforcement will not or does not transport your detainee or arrestee. When they do take him into custody and kick him out somewhere along the way and he makes it to the magistrate, what do you do? How do you proceed in that situation? Are you legally responsible? Are you culpable? Can you be arrested? There's a lot of questions to consider whenever those things happen, and they do happen. I know personally, I've experienced it in years past in a state where private security could arrest anyone for criminal charges of any type, even moving violations. I've had a couple of prisoners kicked out, but once I went down and straightened that out with the chief, it never happened again. So what do you do? Well, let's talk about a couple of different scenarios that do happen to security officers that turn their prisoners over to law enforcement for transport. First of all, you want to make sure that you get that officer's name, identification number. Most agencies no longer use badge numbers per se. You want to document the time that the officer was called, the time that they arrived, and the time that they took custody of your prisoner. Not the time they left the property, but the time that they physically took custody of the prisoner. You also want to document that the officer did a frisk, a search, a pat-down, whatever he does to ensure that that prisoner is not carrying contraband or firearm, weapons, and you want to document that. You also want to make sure that when he does leave the property with the prisoner, that you document that time as well. Because once he takes a hold of that prisoner, it's his prisoner. And anything that happens, any medical issues, any use of force situations will be on the police department, and it'll be their liability and not yours. So what do we do if somewhere along the way the officer takes the prisoner and releases him? Well, you don't have a crime since you're not a police officer, you're a civilian, but you do have a violation of policy procedure, And depending on the crime that the suspect was being charged with, he may have been turning a violent or a public safety risk back out free. So you definitely want to address that with the police chief. You want to do it in a very professional manner. Don't go up to the officer involved and start cussing him out. Don't be threatening him. Don't be saying this is going to be your job, I'm going to see to it, blah, 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 blah. Because what's going to happen is you'll be arrested for criminal harassment or terroristic threatening or disorderly conduct or other charges, and it's not going to help your case or your situation. So you want to be very, very professional. Set up a meeting with the chief, explain, or the sheriff, depending on the county. Explain to him what happened. Show him your documentation of the facts of what happened with the suspect that you had in custody, why you had him in custody, what time the officer arrived, that you released him to the officer in such and such a time with the intention of him transporting to the magistrate or the booking room. In some jurisdictions, the affiant, the person filling out the affidavit, that would be you, has to follow the officer down to the booking or to the magistrate. And in other cases, there are jurisdictions where you actually have 72 hours to get that warrant signed. So I always try to get there immediately or soon thereafter. In this situation, when an officer has kicked a prisoner out of the vehicle or released them and not taking them in for booking, you're not liable at that point. You're not criminally liable, but you may be civilly liable because the person was taken into custody by you. He was restrained, more than likely. He was held against his will for a certain amount of time, and that could plausibly, possibly, go and turn into a civil case against you and your employer. It's something that could happen and has happened, and you have to be careful. However, you can be assured that the police officer and his agency will also be sued because he also detained him. He also held him against his will, and no criminal charges were filed. Remember the difference between criminal and civil, and in civil cases, you only need to prove any case by a preponderance of the evidence. You just have to tip that scale by a little bit. In a criminal case, of course, we all know that it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's very, very important that you follow through. If ever a police officer releases a prisoner, you want to follow through with the sheriff or the police chief, and you want to get that on record as well and document everything that is said. More than likely, your agency or employer will also have to get an attorney involved, and they'll have to probably contact law enforcement and find out what happened. And all of that is to eliminate or diminish the liability aspect for your company and for you in that detention, since no criminal charges were brought. Is it too late to get an arrest warrant? No. As long as you have the information on the suspect, his name, date of birth, social or driver's license, address, you can still go to the magistrate's office. And I always advise security personnel, whenever a prisoner is released by law enforcement, I always advise that you do that. Again, it helps to lessen your case, and it shows that there was a crime that occurred. That's why you originally detained him. That's why you called law enforcement to transport him or her. And it's important to follow through, because if you do not follow through, then the whole detention will be illegal because no crime had occurred. You can't prove the crime was occurred, and you can't show that the suspect went through a criminal process and has been charged with the crime and has either been found guilty or not guilty. So it really, definitely, 100% is important that you follow through every single time. Don't detain someone and release them. You know, I've mentioned this in my training a number of times. You see on cops and other police shows, they handcuff people. Now with Live PD, a very popular A&E channel program, you see oftentimes certain police departments, sheriff's departments, handcuff people the minute that they smell marijuana or the minute that they see something suspicious And they always say, you're not under arrest. We're only detaining you for your protection and for ours. Or we're only detaining you during this investigation. Well, technically, sometimes that's an arrest, sometimes it's not. But certainly for a private citizen and security officer, you don't have that authority. So every time that you handcuff someone, every time you take away their liberty, their freedom of movement, it is an arrest. It is an arrest, not only a technical arrest, but a physical arrest. And you could be not only taken to court, civil, but you could also be charged yourself for kidnapping and unlawful restraint. So be very, very careful with that. Don't handcuff or take anyone into custody that you don't also 100% know that that person will be charged with a crime, because you're getting into some slippery slopes, and it will not be good for your career, and definitely not for your wallet or your criminal record. Eventually, it's going to go south. It's going to go sour, and things will not look good. All right, so what about when police do take a person to the magistrate and they don't file a warrant? The magistrate says, no, there's not enough evidence, and I can't give you a warrant. Well, as long as you follow procedure, as long as you were within your rights to detain that suspect, as long as police or the sheriff handled that suspect properly, then you're going to be good to go. You followed the law. The law allows you to detain or make a citizen's arrest. Police were notified. They did the transport according to their policy and the law, and there was no incident. So really, at that point, you don't really have a whole lot to be concerned about as long as you followed the legal process. When you don't follow that legal process, that's when there's worries. That's when there's problems. That's when there's lawsuits, and that's when you get arrested. Always follow the law, the legal process. Do it the right way. I don't know how many times we have to say that. I don't know how many times I have to talk with people and explain. It's always better to do it honestly, do it the right way the first time, because that way you stay out of trouble. That's going to conclude this episode of On the Legal Side from Private Officer International. Be sure to check out all of our classes and courses available at armorcollege.org. If you're not a member, right now we do have a very special offer. Become a member and get a free course, $119 for both. You can't beat that. Go to our website, privateofficer.org, or send us an email, helpdesk@privateofficer.com. Until the next time, as we always like to say, be safe, be blessed, and we'll see you back here on the radio. Join us every Tuesday for the Private Officer Beat, Wednesdays for the LP Zone, and every other Sunday for On the Legal Side. God bless, and we'll talk with you soon.